It all started with a tiny rubber spider. My coworker and friend, Ben, has a mild fear of spiders. Nothing major, but he can't stand the sight of them and will jump if he sees one. So, one day, when he left his desk to grab coffee, I placed a small, realistic-looking rubber spider on his keyboard. I figured he'd come back, see it, get a little jump scare, and then we'd all laugh. Well, he returned, sat down, saw the spider, and jumped so high he knocked his chair backward. Everyone burst out laughing, but Ben didn't find it quite as funny. He just shot me a look and said, "Okay, you're gonna pay for that." I laughed, thinking he'd let it go. But the next morning, I arrived to find my monitor plastered in sticky notes, layer after layer of bright pink, yellow, and green notes, each one reading Spider King in Ben's handwriting. It took me a solid 15 minutes to peel them all off, and he was watching with a smug grin the whole time. Fine, I thought. If that's how he wanted to play, I was game. So, for my next move, I set his screensaver to a slideshow of tarantulas. When he came back from a meeting and saw his monitor filled with giant, hairy spiders, he yelped and practically threw his coffee. It was priceless, but instead of getting mad, he just smiled and said, "Good one." I thought that was the end of it, but Ben had other ideas. The next day, I went to grab my phone, only to find it weighed about 5 times more than usual. I opened the case, and Ben had somehow filled it with quarters. Every nook and cranny was packed with coins, making my phone heavy and impossible to use. It was ridiculous, and I had to laugh, even though it took me ages to clean out all the coins. But now it was my turn to strike back. Knowing that Ben was meticulous about his workspace, I decided to mess with him a bit. I swapped out his favorite ergonomic keyboard with an ancient, clunky one from the storage closet. It had sticky keys and that loud, obnoxious clicking sound. He sat down, tried typing, and immediately groaned in frustration. "You know, I have to actually work, right?" he muttered, but he couldn't hide his smile. Still, I could tell I was getting to him. Then he went nuclear. The next morning, I arrived at work to find that Ben had covered my entire cubicle in plastic wrap. Every single item, my chair, my computer, my pens, my mug, was wrapped tightly in layer upon layer of cling film. It took me almost an hour to peel everything off, and by then I was fuming. Ben just strolled by and said, "Consider us even." I should have taken that as a sign to end it, but I couldn't resist one final prank. I knew Ben was particular about his coffee. He always brought in his own fancy grounds, grinding them fresh every morning. So, I decided to switch his coffee grounds with instant decaf. I replaced the grounds in his container, then sat back and watched as he made his morning coffee, totally oblivious. By 10 a.m., he was grumbling about feeling off and kept yawning, but he didn't suspect a thing. I thought it was harmless, until I saw him getting visibly irritated, snapping at co-workers and rubbing his temples. By lunch, he looked exhausted, and that's when I started to feel a little guilty. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him, figuring he'd just laugh about it later. Well, he didn't. The next morning, I arrived at work to find my entire desk area covered in glitter. My keyboard, my mouse, my monitor, everything sparkled like a disco ball. I tried cleaning it up, but you know how glitter is. It clings to everything. I spent hours picking up tiny flecks of glitter, and by the end of the day, I was still finding it in my hair, on my clothes, and even on my phone. Ben smirked when he saw me struggling with the glitter bomb. "Maybe next time, you won't mess with a man's coffee," he said. I tried to laugh it off, but I was genuinely annoyed. At this point, I just wanted it all to end. But I couldn't let him get the last word. So, for one final act, I printed out a fake promotion letter from our boss congratulating Ben on his outstanding commitment to prank warfare and humor in the workplace. I framed it and left it on his desk, thinking it would be a funny way to call a truce. But when he saw it, he looked horrified. Turns out our boss had actually caught wind of our prank war, and he'd been warning us to tone it down. Ben thought the letter was real for a few seconds, and when he realized it was fake, he didn't laugh. He just shook his head and said, "We've really messed this up, haven't we?" The next day, our boss called both of us into his office for a talk. He told us that our pranks had started to disrupt the office, and that several coworkers had actually complained about the noise and mess we'd made. I felt mortified, especially when he reminded us to act like professionals. We both promised to stop feeling like scolded kids, After that, Ben and I called a truce. We went back to normal, but things haven't quite been the same. I still find the occasional piece of glitter in my desk, and Ben's coffee is now guarded like Fort Knox. It's like our friendship took a weird hit over a rubber spider and some coffee grounds, and now there's this lingering awkwardness. Looking back, I wonder if I took it too far with the coffee, or if we both let things spiral. I thought it was all in good fun, but maybe I didn't know when to stop. I thought if I gave it enough time, this whole thing would fade. That I'd wake up one morning and it'd be like it never happened. That the weight of guilt would slip away on its own. But the more time passes, the clearer it becomes that this isn't something I can just wait out. I didn't just miss a dinner. I missed something much bigger. And now it's like I'm only starting to understand what I lost. I tried to convince myself that missing the dinner didn't matter, that it was just another celebration, nothing life-altering. But that simple thought, Danny expecting me to be there, looking for me in the crowd, it just won't leave my mind. I feel like I've been circling around this truth I don't want to face, that I wasn't there when he needed me, and that I didn't even realize he needed me until it was too late. Growing up, I always admired how dedicated Danny was, how he set goals and went after them with everything he had. We used to talk for hours about the future, about all the things we wanted to do, the lives we wanted to build. And through it all, he was the one who stayed focused, who worked and sacrificed. I think somewhere along the way, I got used to the idea that he was the one who didn't need help, who had everything figured out. I thought that my support wouldn't mean much to him, because he was already so steady on his own. But now I see that maybe he wasn't as invincible as I thought. Maybe he wanted to celebrate his big night with the people who'd been with him along the way. Not just his parents and siblings, but the cousins he grew up with, the people he'd counted on to understand the years of work he'd put in. And I just didn't see it. I didn't realize that he wanted me there as a part of his support system, and that by not showing up, I sent the message that I didn't care enough to be part of that moment. I keep telling myself that it was an honest mistake, that I didn't know how much it meant to him. But deep down, I think I knew. I just didn't want to make the effort. I didn't want to be inconvenienced, didn't want to drive out on a work night, didn't want to be one more face in a crowd. I thought he'll be fine without me, and now I'm realizing that fine doesn't mean he wouldn't feel my absence. Every family gathering since then has felt different. There's a distance now, not just with Danny, but with everyone. It's like they see me differently too, like they know I wasn't there when it mattered, and they're quietly disappointed in me. No one says anything, but I can feel it, a sense of disapproval, a sense that I let the family down in a way that I can't easily fix. And honestly, it makes me wonder if this was a wake-up call I should have had years ago, if I've been neglecting the people who care about me all along. The worst part is that this wasn't the first time I've chosen my own comfort over someone else's need. I think back to all the times I skipped out on things because I didn't feel like going, because I thought people would understand. Weddings, birthdays, family dinners. I treated them all like optional events, assuming they wouldn't miss me, that I could always just make it up next time. But now, after seeing the impact of this one missed night, I'm starting to realize that all those missed events add up. Each absence chips away at something important, something that keeps people close, even if they don't say it outright. I want to reach out to Danny, to tell him that I finally understand, that I see how much my absence hurt him, that I'm sorry I didn't recognize it sooner. But every time I pick up my phone, I hesitate, because I'm realizing that words might not mean much anymore. I had the chance to show up when it counted, and I chose not to. And an apology, as heartfelt as it may be, doesn't change the fact that I prioritize myself over his happiness. I thought about sending him a letter, explaining everything, pouring out the guilt I've been carrying. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that maybe this isn't about easing my own conscience. Maybe this guilt is something I need to feel, a reminder of what it costs to put your own convenience above the people who trust you. I took Danny's support for granted, believing it would always be there. And now I'm seeing that I was the one who let him down, that I'm the one who made him feel alone on a night that was supposed to be about celebration. It's funny, I always thought being independent and laid back made me someone who didn't need constant connection. But maybe that's just another way of saying I've been selfish, hiding behind an excuse that allowed me to skip out on people when it didn't suit me. And now I'm left with this regret, this ache that maybe Danny won't ever look at me the same way, that maybe I lost the chance to be someone he could really count on. Part of me is still trying to rationalize it, still hoping that someday he'll forgive me, that he'll see I didn't mean to hurt him. But another part of me knows that sometimes the people we hurt move on, that they find others who are willing to be there without needing a reminder. And maybe that's what I have to face now, that Danny will be fine without me, but that it was me who lost something by not being there. So here I am, still wondering if I'm blowing this out of proportion or if I'm finally seeing the truth of my own actions. Am I the one who turned a simple mistake into something bigger? Or did I really let my cousin down in a way I can't undo? It happened with my uncle, Greg. He's not just an uncle to me. He's more like a second dad. Growing up, he'd take me fishing, taught me how to drive, and even got me my first real job at his contracting company. He's one of those dependable, old-school guys who never complains and never, ever asks for help. But over the last few months, he'd been harder to reach. He'd cancel our plans at the last minute, which was completely out of character, and when we did talk, he sounded distant. My aunt mentioned that things had been rough for him at work, and knowing Uncle Greg, that meant he'd be bottling everything up and handling it solo. So, when he asked me to come over to talk business last weekend, I thought he'd finally decided to open up. Maybe he needed some support with the company or was ready to let someone in on what was going on. I arrived at his place, ready to listen and help however he needed. When I got there, he was in his workshop, surrounded by stacks of paperwork that looked like they'd taken over his whole desk. He gave me a quick hug, then gestured to a chair, looking more worn out than I'd ever seen him. So, business has been challenging, he started in that careful way he speaks when he's trying not to show too much. He went on about some setbacks they'd had, unpaid invoices, a big job that had fallen through last minute. As he spoke, I glanced at the paperwork scattered around. I noticed a few from the bank, some stamped with red. It looked like he'd been behind on payments for a while, something I never would have guessed. Uncle Greg was always so careful with money, always seemed so solid. Uncle Greg, I said, keeping my voice low, if things are tight, maybe I could help you out with the business, even just to get things back on track. His face changed immediately, shutting down in a way I'd never seen before. You think I called you over here to bail me out? His tone was sharp, defensive. No, that's not what I meant, I said, stumbling over my words. You've been there for me my whole life. I just want to be there for you now. He shook his head, crossing his arms, his expression unreadable. I don't need anyone being there for me. I've been running this business just fine on my own. I don't need my kid nephew, telling me how to manage it. The words stung more than I'd expected. I tried to explain. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I just wanted to help out, make things a little easier for you. But he shook his head again, his voice tight. I built this from scratch. I don't need charity, and I don't need anyone thinking I can't handle it. We stood there, the silence stretching between us, and I could feel the wall going up around him. I thought I was stepping in to offer support, but to him, it felt like an insult, a challenge to his pride and independence. I realized then how much he valued that independence, more than I'd understood. I finally said, "All right, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel like you can't handle things." He gave a stiff nod, but the tension between us didn't ease. "I'll figure it out, okay? Thanks, but I've got it." I left his workshop feeling more than a little defeated. I thought I was doing the right thing, offering him a hand the way he'd always done for me. But apparently, I'd only made things worse, like I was questioning his ability to handle his own life and his own business. On the drive home, I kept replaying it all in my head, wondering if I'd gone too far, if I should have just kept my mouth shut. He was family, and all I wanted was to be there for him. But now I'm left wondering if I was wrong for even trying. My buddy Tom and I decided to host a housewarming party for our new place. We've been friends since college, and when we finally moved into a bigger apartment, we knew we had to throw a big get-together to kick things off. We'd hyped it up to everyone, calling it the ultimate housewarming bash. We split the responsibilities pretty evenly, or at least that's how it seemed at first. Tom, the social butterfly, said he'd handle the invites, music, and atmosphere, while I'd cover the food, drinks, and some housewarming games to keep things fun. Tom had thrown some epic parties in college, so I figured he'd pull off his end without a hitch. I'm more of a low-key guy, but I thought I could handle getting some decent food and drinks. Maybe something a step up from our usual pizza and beer nights. In the days leading up to the party, we didn't check in with each other much. Every time we mentioned the party, we'd just say, "It's gonna be epic," or "People won't know what hit them." I saw Tom on his laptop a few times with a playlist open, and I took that as a sign he was deep into planning mode. I figured he'd be setting up some cool lighting or ordering decorations. Meanwhile, I was busy at work and just picking things up on the fly. I grabbed some snacks from the grocery store, bought a few cases of beer, and threw in a bottle of wine or two for good measure. The night of the party, I came home expecting to find the place decked out. Instead, I walked into a nearly empty living room. There was no music, no decorations, and not a single piece of vibe in sight. The most festive thing in the room was Tom's laptop sitting on the coffee table, with Spotify open to a generic playlist. Tom, where's all the party stuff?" I asked, half laughing, expecting he was hiding something. He looked at me, totally unfazed. "What do you mean?" I figured we'd just keep it low-key. Chill vibes. I felt my stomach drop. "Low-key? Dude, we hyped this up for weeks. I thought you'd be handling, everything to set the mood. You didn't get any lights or decorations or anything." He shrugged, giving me a look like I was overreacting. I mean, we didn't need to go crazy. It's just a housewarming, right? I felt my frustration rising. "Tom, I brought chips, pretzels, and beer. I thought you'd be handling the actual party part. I mean, you're the one who called it the ultimate housewarming bash." He crossed his arms, clearly annoyed. "And I thought you'd bring some real food. Chips and pretzels? You didn't even pick up, a veggie platter or anything. I thought you'd at least try a little harder than just beer." Before I could respond, our friends started arriving, and the awkwardness was palpable. People walked in, expecting a full-blown party, and instead found, a couple of sad bowls of chips and a playlist running from Tom's laptop. People were polite enough not to say anything directly, but I saw a few raised eyebrows. At one point, a friend asked, "Is there a theme? Or is it just a chill thing?" Tom and I tried to salvage it by offering drinks and trying to act like the laid-back vibe was intentional. But it was clear that everyone was expecting more. A few people even pulled out their phones to find other plans halfway through the night. And those who stayed ended up playing some random card game that one of our friends brought, while Tom and I stood around feeling embarrassed and annoyed at each other. After everyone left, Tom turned to me, looking just as frustrated as I felt. "Well, that was a flop. I thought we were supposed to make this a night to remember." I rolled my eyes. "Oh, really? Because it seems like you barely tried. You didn't bring anything to make it feel special. You were supposed to handle the whole atmosphere, remember?" He scoffed. "Yeah, maybe if you'd put in more effort with the food, people wouldn't have been so underwhelmed." We went back and forth, each of us blaming the other for not putting in enough effort. I knew, deep down, that I could have done more, but at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to admit it. I mean, he's the one who's always throwing parties, right? I thought he'd go all out. In the end, we didn't talk much as we cleaned up the empty cups and chip crumbs, both of us quietly fuming. Part of me wondered if I'd really dropped the ball, or if he just hadn't pulled his weight. Now I'm left wondering, AITA? My best friend, Maria, had been juggling so much lately, 2 kids, a demanding job, and trying to finish her degree online. I'd never seen her so stressed, and every time we talked, she sounded more and more overwhelmed. She barely had time to catch her breath, let alone do anything for herself. So I decided to step in and do something special, something I thought would give her a little break from it all. I knew she loved baking, but hadn't had time to enjoy it in months, so I planned a surprise baking day for her. I gathered all her favorite recipes, got ingredients for the pastries she loved, and even set up a little baking station in my kitchen so she could come over and just dive in without thinking. I called her husband Dan to make sure he'd be able to handle the kids for a few hours, and he agreed to keep it a secret. I figured it would be a perfect way for her to unwind, doing something she loved without any of the planning or pressure. When she came over that Saturday, though, the look on her face when I revealed the setup wasn't what I'd expected. She looked tired and not at all excited. "Wait, you planned this whole day?" she asked, eyeing the counter full of baking supplies. I smiled, still convinced she'd come around. "Yes, I thought you'd love it. You're always talking about how much you miss baking, so I figured I'd take care of everything so you could just relax and bake all you want." She forced a smile, but I could see she was uneasy. I appreciate the thought, but I actually had plans to catch up on schoolwork today. And honestly, I'm so tired, I was hoping to maybe nap while Dan took the kids out. I felt my enthusiasm waver. Oh, I didn't realize. I just thought you might enjoy some time doing something fun, something for yourself. You're always so stressed, and I wanted you to have a day where you didn't have to worry about anything else. She sighed, looking almost guilty. I know you meant well, and it's sweet really, but this just feels like something else on my to-do list. I don't even have the energy to bake right now, and I feel bad because you obviously went to a lot of trouble. That stung. I'd spent the whole morning setting up, getting everything ready, so she could have a carefree, relaxing day. Maria, I just wanted you to have something nice for yourself. You're always doing things for everyone else. She nodded, but her expression didn't change. I get that, and I'm grateful, but it kind of feels like you're giving me what you think I need instead of what I actually need. I mean, baking is great, but right now, what I need is just a quiet moment to rest. I stood there, not sure what to say, feeling deflated. I thought this would be the perfect gift, something that showed how well I knew her. But instead, she seemed more stressed about disappointing me than excited to relax. In the end, she thanked me, gave me an awkward hug, and went home. I packed everything away, feeling like I'd completely missed the mark. Now I'm left wondering if I was selfish for planning something without asking her, or if I was just trying to be a good friend and show her how much I care. So here's the background. My brother recently moved into a new house, his dream home, and he's been planning this big housewarming party for months. He's been super excited about it, inviting practically everyone he knows, talking about it nonstop. He even asked me if I could come a day early to help set up, saying he needed all the extra hands he could get. I get it. Moving into a new place is a big deal, and he wanted everything to be perfect. The thing is, that weekend I'd already booked a solo hiking trip. It was supposed to be a much-needed escape from work and all the other stuff piling up in my life. I'd planned the whole trip months in advance, and I'd really been looking forward to it. When my brother first asked me to come help, I told him I'd try to stop by the party, but couldn't guarantee anything else. I figured I'd drop in for an hour or two, congratulate him, and then head out early so I wouldn't miss too much of my trip. I thought that was a good middle ground, being there to support him without giving up the plans I'd made for myself. But as the party got closer, my brother started ramping up the pressure. He kept calling, asking if I'd be there to help set up, and each time, I told him I couldn't. Then he started guilting me about how he couldn't believe I wasn't willing to pitch in, and how everyone else had rearranged their schedules to help him out. At one point, he even said, "I'd do it for you, no questions asked." I told him I'd still come by for the party itself, but that wasn't enough for him. He kept calling, dropping hints that I was being selfish for not being fully there for him. Finally, I had enough. The day of the party, I showed up for an hour, brought him a gift, and made small talk with family and friends. But as soon as I told him I was heading out, he looked at me like I'd just insulted him. He pulled me aside and said, "Are you serious? You're just going to bail? I thought family meant something to you." I tried to explain that I'd had my hiking trip planned for ages and that I was happy for him, but he just shook his head, muttering something about how he expected more from me. I left anyway and went on my trip, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. I spent the whole weekend trying to enjoy myself, but every time I checked my phone, there was another message from someone in the family about how I disappointed my brother, or a passive-aggressive comment in the family group chat about people who don't know how to support family. Even my mom sent me a text saying she was so hurt that I couldn't put family first just this once. Now, it's been a few weeks, and everyone still seems a little cold with me. My brother hasn't reached out since the party, and my mom's still making comments here and there about how everyone worked so hard to help make his day special. No one seems to understand that I did make an effort. I showed up, I brought a gift, and I celebrated with him. But apparently, it wasn't enough because I didn't drop everything for the whole weekend. I'm at a loss here. I feel like they're expecting way too much from me, but they're all treating me like I'm the one in the wrong for not putting my brother's party above everything else in my life. Louis came into my life when I was 25, a scrappy beagle mixed with big, floppy ears and the kind of energy that could light up a room. He'd been surrendered to the shelter by a family who couldn't handle him, and I could see why. He was curious, always into everything, and had an obsession with chasing anything that moved. But from the moment he trotted over to me, nudging my leg with his nose, I knew he was my dog. Louis was my constant companion through it all. Every move, every job change, every heartbreak. Even when things felt like they were falling apart, Louis was there, a steady, warm presence that made the world feel manageable. Now, at 15, Louis had slowed down a lot. His once bright eyes were cloudier, his once boundless energy more measured. I knew he was old, but somehow I convinced myself we had more time. Then one night, he just stopped eating. I tried everything, chicken, treats, his favorite scrambled eggs, but he only sniffed the food and turned away. The next morning, I took him to the vet, my heart pounding with fear. The vet's face was serious as she explained Louis' condition. He had a large mass on his spleen, likely cancerous, and without intervention, he'd have maybe a month or two at best. We could do surgery, she said. If we remove the spleen and he recovers well, it could buy him some time, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. But at his age, recovery could be difficult, and there are no guarantees. I was crushed, but my gut reaction was immediate. We'll do the surgery, I said, looking down at Louis, who was lying on the exam table, eyes half closed, exhausted but still with that familiar, trusting look in his eyes. I couldn't imagine life without him. I didn't want to, but when I looked over at my wife, Claire, I could see a shadow of doubt in her expression. On the drive home, she finally spoke, her voice gentle but full of sadness. "Are you sure this is what's best for him?" she asked quietly. "He's so tired already, and surgery, it's a lot for a dog his age." I knew she wasn't trying to hurt me, but it felt like she was giving up on him, and I felt my frustration flare. "I can't just let him go, Claire. He's still Louis. He deserves a chance." She reached over, resting her hand on mine. "I know you love him, and I love him too. But he's been through so much already, and surgery, recovery, all of that will be hard on him. I don't want his last days to be full of pain and confusion. I just want him to be comfortable." I could see the worry in her eyes, but I wasn't ready to face it. Louis had been with me through so much, and the idea of not fighting felt like a betrayal. For the next few days, we danced around each other, caught in this emotional tug-of-war. I threw myself into reading every success story I could find, every article about dogs who'd survived spleen surgery, clinging to the hope that he could beat this if we just gave him the chance. But Claire kept bringing up the risks, the potential for pain, the long recovery. Finally, one night, she suggested we go back to the vet together. "Let's just talk it over," she said gently. "I want to make sure we're doing this for him, not just because we can't let go." The next day, we sat down with the vet, who patiently explained what the surgery would entail and what Louis' recovery might look like if he survived it. "There's a chance he could do well," she said. "But with a mass this large, surgery itself is risky. And for older dogs, recovery can be rough. They don't always understand why they're in pain, and that can be very hard for them." Claire's hand tightened around mine, and I could feel my own heart breaking as I tried to accept the reality I'd been avoiding. When we got home, I sat with Louis on the couch, running my fingers through his soft fur. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, full of trust and love, and it hit me that maybe I was holding on for me, not for him. I didn't want to say goodbye, but I didn't want his last days to be full of fear and pain either. That night, I finally told Claire I was ready to let him go. She wrapped her arms around me, holding me as I cried, whispering that I was making the right choice, that this was the kindest thing we could do for him. We spent his last week making sure every moment was filled with love. We took him to his favorite park, let him nap in the sun, gave him all the treats he wanted. Each day, I catch myself wondering if I was making a mistake, but deep down, I knew it was the only way to honor the life he'd shared with me. On the day we said goodbye, the vet came to our home, and I held Louis close, whispering to him how much he'd meant to me, how grateful I was for every day we'd had together. He drifted off peacefully, his head resting on my lap, his body finally at rest. I stayed beside him long after he was gone, feeling the emptiness settle in, the silence that would now fill the space he once occupied. Since that day, every part of the house feels different, too quiet, too empty. I keep expecting to hear his paws on the floor, to see him curled up in his favorite spot on the couch. I know, deep down, that letting him go was the right choice, that he's no longer suffering. But there's still a part of me that wonders if I gave up too soon, if maybe I could have fought harder, if there was something more I could have done. So here I am, asking AITA for choosing to let him go instead of fighting until the very end. Alright, here's what went down at my friend Melissa's engagement party last weekend. I went in thinking I was just being a supportive friend, but apparently people think I overstepped. You tell me if I was out of line. So Melissa and her fiancé, Sam, have been together for a little over a year, and I guess they really hit it off fast. Melissa's been over the moon ever since Sam proposed, and she put together this beautiful engagement party at a nice restaurant. She invited all of our friends, along with both of their families, and everyone was there to celebrate. The whole place was decorated with fairy lights, flowers, and all that, and they looked really happy, so I was genuinely excited for her. As the night went on, there were speeches, toasts, and everyone was taking turns telling cute stories about how Melissa and Sam met, how they're perfect for each other, and how this is clearly meant to be. There were a lot of comments like, "We all knew they were soulmates, and they found their forever." Now, I think Melissa and Sam are great together, but if I'm honest, a year isn't all that long to know someone before committing to marriage. I couldn't help but think they might be rushing things just a bit, but hey, that's not my call. When it was my turn to toast, I decided to keep it real. I raised my glass and said, "Melissa, you know I love you, and I'm so happy for you both. Marriage is a huge commitment, and it takes patience and compromise, but I know you two will figure it out together. Just remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint." I laughed a little, hoping to keep it lighthearted, but there was this awkward silence for a second. Melissa smiled, but it was one of those tight, polite smiles. I brushed it off, figuring maybe people just weren't expecting practical advice, especially after all the soulmate talk. Later, I was chatting with a few friends, and we got onto the topic of how quickly everything had happened. One of them joked, "I don't know if I'd have the guts to get engaged that fast." I chimed in saying, "Yeah, it's definitely a whirlwind romance. I just hope they're ready for the reality of marriage. It's not all fairy tales, you know?" I thought I was being honest, just sharing what I've seen from friends who've gone through rough patches after quick engagements. One of our friends looked a little uncomfortable and said, "Maybe tonight's not the time for that," but I figured we were just talking as friends. A bit later, Melissa and I were catching up one-on-one, and she was going on about her wedding plans, the venue, the colors, her dress ideas. I could tell she was thrilled, and I was genuinely happy for her, but it was a lot of planning for someone who just got engaged. So I said, "Wow, you're really jumping into this full force. Just don't feel like you have to rush every little detail. You got time to figure it all out, right?" She paused and then said, "Yeah, but it's exciting, you know? I've always dreamed about my wedding." I told her, "Of course. I'm just saying, sometimes when things move fast, it's good to take a step back and make sure it's really what you want. Marriage is a big deal." She got quiet, and I could tell she didn't love that comment, so I tried to lighten the mood by adding, "But hey, I'm sure you two will make it work." As the night was winding down, I noticed she seemed a bit distant. When I went to say goodbye, she pulled me aside and said, "Look, I know you're just trying to be realistic, but some of the things you said tonight felt like you were doubting us. This is supposed to be a happy time for me, and it felt like you kept reminding me of everything that could go wrong." I was honestly caught off guard. I told her, "I'm sorry if it came off that way. I just wanted to make sure you're thinking things through. Marriage is huge, and I thought you'd appreciate some practical advice." She just sighed and said, "Sometimes I just want to enjoy the moment without the advice, you know?" I didn't know what else to say, so I just congratulated her again and left. But now a couple of our mutual friends have been hinting that I didn't read the room and should have kept it positive for our big night. I didn't mean to bring down the mood. I just thought being realistic was better than pretending marriage is all sunshine and roses, especially since they haven't been together that long. So, was I out of line for giving a little honest advice at my friend's engagement party, or was I just being a good friend looking out for her? Every year, my friends and I do a huge Friendsgiving dinner. We've been doing it since college, and it's always a chaotic potluck-style event at my friend Sam's house. Everyone brings their own dish, some traditional, some totally weird experiments, and we all just sit around on mismatched chairs, eating off paper plates, talking over each other, and usually ending the night with board games and silly drinking games. It's always loud, a little messy, and absolutely hilarious. This year, Sam had to travel for work and couldn't host. So, everyone naturally looked to me to plan the night. I figured since I had full control for once, I'd take things up a notch and make it a grown-up Friendsgiving. We're all doing well in our careers now, and I thought it'd be fun to celebrate how far we'd come since those chaotic college days. So, I booked a private dining room at a nice restaurant, one with a cozy, sophisticated vibe and a set menu. I even arranged for a small centerpiece and named cards for each person, just to make it feel special. I didn't tell everyone the plan right away. I wanted it to be a surprise. I thought they'd be thrilled to walk into this beautiful room and see all the little details I'd planned out. It was going to be a Friendsgiving for the books, the kind we'd talk about for years. A week before the dinner, I sent a group message with the location, letting everyone know we'd be going classy this year and to dress up a bit. I expected them to be excited, but the reactions were mixed. My friend Jen replied first. "Wait, what happened to the usual potluck? I already bought ingredients to make my sweet potato casserole." Then Mark said, "Yeah, I was planning on making my famous stuffing. Plus, this place sounds a little pricey." I try to reassure them. "Guys, don't worry about food. This place has a great Thanksgiving menu, and I'll cover some of the costs. Just show up, look nice, and enjoy the night. Trust me, you'll love it." But they didn't seem convinced. Jen replied, "I kind of love our chaotic potluck, though. The weird dishes are half the fun." Mark added, "And I love bringing my own food. It's not the same if someone else makes it." Still, I figured once they saw the setup, they'd change their minds. The night of the dinner, I got there early to set up the name cards and make sure everything looked perfect. The dining room was stunning, with candles and fall decorations, and I was so excited for everyone to walk in and be wowed. But when they arrived, the atmosphere was off. Everyone looked a little uncomfortable in their dress clothes, and instead of being impressed, they seemed taken aback. Mark walked in and looked around, muttering, "This feels more like a wedding reception than Friendsgiving." Jen didn't even bother to sit in her assigned seat, plopping down in a random chair and mumbling, "Where's the paper plates?" I try to laugh it off. "Come on, guys. This is still Friendsgiving, just a bit more sophisticated. We're grown-ups now, right? Why not make it a bit fancy?" But they didn't seem convinced. When the first course came out, a small salad with cranberries and goat cheese, Jen looked around a little annoyed. "This is the appetizer? We're used to diving into mashed potatoes by now." Mark chimed in, saying, "Yeah, this feels too formal. We usually pile everything on our plates at once. It doesn't feel like Friendsgiving without everyone's random contributions." I try to reassure them. I just wanted to make it special for us. We can still have fun. It's just a new take on our tradition. But as the courses went on, the vibe only got worse. No one seemed to be enjoying themselves. Instead of laughing and joking, they all seemed polite and stiff. When the waiter came around to refill drinks, everyone went quiet, which never happens with our usual group. Jen finally leaned over to me and said, "This isn't really our style. Friendsgiving's supposed to be messy and casual, and ours. This just feels like a fancy dinner with strangers." By dessert, it was clear that the night hadn't gone as I'd planned. People made quick work of their pumpkin tarts, and instead of lingering to chat like we usually do, everyone made excuses to leave early. As they said goodbye, Mark gave me a little pat on the back and said, "Maybe next year we just do it at someone's house." That's the whole point of Friendsgiving, you know? I was left sitting in the dining room alone, feeling like all my effort had been for nothing. I thought everyone would appreciate having a more elevated experience, but it's like they didn't even care about the nice setup, the food, or the details I put together. Now, everyone's been making little comments in the group chat about keeping it simple next year, and I can't help but feel like I missed something. I just wanted to do something special, something that would be memorable. So, AITA for trying to make Friendsgiving a little fancy. This time, it was my younger sister, Emma. Emma's always been fiercely independent, always the one doing things her own way. Even as a kid, she'd refuse help with her homework or get annoyed if I tried to give her advice. She moved to a new city last year for a job she'd been so excited about, and though we didn't talk as much as we used to, I figured she was thriving out there. But lately, she'd been more distant. She'd missed a couple of family video calls, brushed off my messages with quick, vague replies, and every time we actually did talk, she sounded stressed. I try not to worry too much, telling myself she was just busy adjusting. But then last week, she called me out of the blue, her voice shaky. She asked if she could crash at my place for a few days. I was surprised but didn't hesitate to say yes. When she arrived, she looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. I tried to keep things light, asking if she wanted to go out or order in, but she just shrugged, barely making eye contact. Eventually, she plopped down on the couch and muttered something about needing a break from everything. As we sat there, she absent-mindedly pulled out a pile of envelopes from her bag. They were mostly bills and statements, and one caught my eye. It was from her landlord. I didn't mean to stare, but the words "Final Notice" were printed in bold across the top. My heart sank as I realized she might be behind on her rent. I hadn't known things had gotten so tough for her. I took a deep breath, trying to sound as gentle as possible. "Hey, Em, are things okay? I mean, with money and everything? If you're struggling, maybe I could help out a bit." Her face hardened immediately, and she shoved the letters back into her bag. "Were you reading my mail?" she snapped, her voice laced with anger and embarrassment. "No, I just saw the notice," I said quickly, holding my hands up defensively. "I wasn't snooping. I just got worried, that's all. If things are tight, you don't have to go through this alone." She looked away, her jaw tight. "I didn't come here for a lecture or a handout. I just wanted some space." "Emma, I'm not trying to lecture you," I said, feeling a lump of frustration rising in my throat. "You've helped me out so many times before. I just thought maybe I could help you this time." She shook her head, her expression icy. "It's not the same. I don't need anyone's help, especially not my big brother swooping in like I'm some kind of screw-up. I can handle it." Her words stung, and for a second, I didn't know how to respond. I'd come into this thinking I was being supportive, showing her that she wasn't alone. But all I'd done was make her feel small, like I was doubting her ability to handle her own life. After a long silence, I mumbled, "I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I just didn't want you to go through this alone." She crossed her arms, still looking away. "Well, maybe that's my choice," she said, her voice cold. The rest of her visit felt tense, an awkwardness hanging between us that neither of us could shake. I'd hoped she'd feel relieved, maybe even open up, but instead, I'd only made her feel cornered, like I was invading her independence. When she left a few days later, we hugged, but it felt forced. I watched her walk away, feeling a painful knot of regret. I'd thought I was being a caring brother, but instead, I'd overstepped in a way I hadn't intended. Now I'm left wondering if I should have just let her figure things out on her own, no matter how tough it might be. It all began with an innocent gag gift. My coworker, Sam, and I had always been friendly, and we'd occasionally play little pranks on each other. Nothing major, just silly stuff to make each other laugh and break up the workday. But then one day, I found a small trophy in a thrift store that read "World's Slowest Worker," and thought it would be funny to leave it on Sam's desk. I figured he'd laugh and move on. When Sam came in the next morning and saw it, he rolled his eyes but smiled, muttering, "Real funny." I could tell he thought it was harmless enough, but he shot me a look and said, "You better watch your back, man." I laughed it off, figuring he was joking. But Sam was serious. The next day, I opened my desk drawer to find a sticky note that read, "Nice try, Speedy Gonzalez," attached to a half-melted chocolate bar that was crammed inside. My entire drawer was smeared with chocolate, and it took forever to clean it all out. Sam just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking smug. "Fine. If you wanted to play, I'd play." So the next day, I filled his stapler with glitter. Not a lot, just enough so that when he used it, his desk would get a little sparkly. He opened it, and boom. His entire desk was covered in a fine layer of glitter. He gave me a smile that was a little too calm and said, "All right, we're doing this." The next day, I got to work and found my computer mouse didn't work. After a few minutes of frustration, I flipped it over and saw that he'd taped a small sticky note over the sensor with "Gotcha" written on it. Simple, but effective. I laughed it off, but now I felt like I needed to up my game. So, I hid a tiny Bluetooth speaker under his desk and played random sound effects every few minutes. Soft whispers, footsteps, random beeps. He kept looking around, getting increasingly paranoid. I thought he'd laugh once he found the speaker, but he looked genuinely rattled, muttering, "This isn't funny, man." He He finally found it and gave me a look that said game on. The next day, he snuck into my office during lunch and hid crickets in my filing cabinet. Live crickets. I didn't find them until later that afternoon, when they'd started chirping up a storm. It freaked me out at first, then I realized what he'd done. It took me a while to catch them and release them outside, and by the time I was done, I was more than a little annoyed. So I went for the classic. I changed the autocorrect on his computer to replace the with but and end with pickle. It was childish, but I knew he was scheduled to send a long report that day, and I figured he'd catch it quickly. But apparently, he didn't notice until after he'd sent the report to our manager. He stormed over to my desk, face red, and hissed, "I look like an idiot. You're dead." At this point, the whole office was watching, and people were placing bets on who would come out on top. But neither of us wanted to back down. The next day, I opened my desk drawer to find it filled with shredded paper. And by filled, I mean packed. It took me forever to dig out my things, and there was paper confetti all over the floor. Sam was laughing, and I tried to stay calm, but I knew I couldn't let him have the last laugh. So, I came up with what I thought was my best prank yet. Sam was very particular about his coffee routine. Every day at exactly 10 a.m., he'd go to the break room, make his fancy pour-over coffee, and spend a few minutes savoring it at his desk. So I swapped his high-end coffee grounds with decaf and filled his sugar container with salt. When he took that first sip, he nearly spat it out, his face a mix of disgust and betrayal. "You mess with my coffee," he said, genuinely angry. The next day, I got my payback. I came back from a meeting to find my entire computer monitor covered in plastic wrap, and my keyboard and mouse completely wrapped in foil. Every key had its own layer. It took ages to peel it all off, and I could barely focus the rest of the day with all the crinkling. At this point, I should have just ended it, but I was too far in, so I decided to go big. I bought a ridiculous amount of those tiny little googly eyes and spent my lunch break covering every single item on his desk in them, his pens, his stapler, his phone, even his chair. When he came back, he just stared at his desk, then looked at me and shook his head. "Fine," he said. "You asked for this." The next morning, I came into the office and found my desk completely rearranged. Every item was in a new place. Even my computer had been angled away from me. I sat down, feeling uneasy. Then I noticed that my email notifications had been mysteriously set to go off every 5 seconds. It was a nightmare. I finally gave in, admitting defeat, and begged him to fix it. But Sam wasn't done. He just grinned and said, "Apology accepted," but then refused to help me fix my settings. I spent half the day with endless email pings going off until I figured it out myself. By this point, our boss noticed something was up. We got called into his office for a talk, where he told us he'd had enough of the pranks and that we needed to act professionally if we wanted to keep our jobs. It was embarrassing, and we both agreed to stop. Things cooled off after that, but the vibe between us changed. We used to be friends, but now there's this weird distance, and the whole office sees us as the troublemakers. I still find the occasional googly eye stuck to my desk, and every time I hear an email notification, I can't help but cringe a little. Looking back, I realized that maybe I should have just let the rubber chicken trophy be the end of it. So, AITA? About 2 months ago, my friend Jenna reached out to me. We'd been best friends in high school, but drifted apart over the years. She was one of those people who always had big dreams, but never seemed to catch a break. When she called, she told me her situation was a mess. She'd just lost her job, was behind on rent, and didn't have anywhere else to go. She asked if she could crash with me, just for a few weeks, while she sorted things out and got back on her feet. I remembered all the times we'd helped each other out as teenagers, so I said yes, hoping I could be there for her like she'd been there for me. I cleaned out the guest room, stocked up on groceries, and made sure she felt welcome. When Jenna arrived, she looked exhausted but thanked me 100 times, promising she'd be out soon and wouldn't be a burden. I felt good about helping her and thought it might even be nice to have some company for a while. The first week, Jenna was great. She'd get up early, head out with her laptop, and come back each night with stories about all the places she'd applied to and the people she'd met. We'd cook dinner together, watch movies, and laugh about old times. She seemed genuinely motivated, and I thought she'd be back on her feet in no time. I even sent her job listings and offered to help her with her resume. But things changed in the second week. Jenna started sleeping in late, sometimes until noon, and I'd come home to find her lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone or watching Netflix. When I asked how the job hunt was going, she'd sigh and say, "I'm waiting to hear back from a few places, or it's harder than it looks." I tried to be patient, thinking maybe she was just stressed, but I started to feel uneasy. Then came the mess. Jenna would leave dishes in the sink, empty snack bags on the table, and makeup and clothes scattered all over the bathroom. I'd come home to a new mess every day. When I gently reminded her to clean up after herself, she'd laugh it off, saying, "Oh, I'm a little messy." But nothing ever changed. Slowly, my clean apartment started looking like a college dorm room. By week 3, it was clear she wasn't job hunting at all. She'd stay up all night binge-watching TV and sleep well into the afternoon. When I suggested looking into temp work just to get some income coming in, she brushed it off, saying, "I don't want to settle for something that won't help my career." Meanwhile, she was burning through my groceries like a teenager, eating my snacks and using up ingredients I'd bought for specific meals. I finally asked if she could pitch in, and she promised she would as soon as she got her first paycheck. But with no job, that paycheck was a distant hope. Things really hit a breaking point when I found out she'd been using my stuff without asking. I'd gone to grab some makeup one morning and found most of my products were nearly empty. Then I noticed she'd been using my shampoo, my laundry detergent, and even my expensive skincare products. When I gently brought it up, she looked surprised and said, "Oh, I just thought we were sharing everything, sorry." It felt like I was suddenly supporting both of us without her even realizing it. The final straw was when she started bringing over friends without asking. One Friday night, I came home to find 2 of her friends I didn't know in the living room, eating food I'd bought and drinking wine I'd saved for a special occasion. When I asked her to give me a heads up before inviting people over, she seemed offended, saying, "Relax. I didn't think you'd mind. It's just a couple of friends." At this point, I felt like I was living with a stranger. I tried sitting her down for a serious conversation. I told her that I was happy to help, but I needed her to start contributing and actively looking for work or to consider finding another place. She stared at me like I'd just slapped her, then went on a rant about how some people don't know what it's like to struggle and how it must be nice to have a stable job and a comfortable life. She told me I was being selfish and unsupportive and accused me of giving up on her. I was floored. Here I was covering her food, her rent, her everything, and she was treating me like I was the bad guy. I tried to explain that I just needed her to show some effort and respect for my space. But she shut down, muttering about how not everyone's as lucky, and stormed off to the guest room. Since then, she's barely spoken to me and spends most of her time holed up in the guest room or leaving messes around the apartment. She's still using my things, eating my food, and acting like she's entitled to everything here. When we do talk, she makes comments like, "Must be nice to have it all figured out, or not everyone's had it so easy." Part of me feels terrible, like maybe I was too harsh or should have handled things differently. But another part of me feels completely taken advantage of, wondering if she ever planned to make an effort at all. Alright, here's the situation. My girlfriend, Lily, and I are a few weeks away from moving in together, and you'd think I'd be on cloud 9. I mean, we've been talking about this for so long. It feels like the natural next step. But right now, I'm honestly questioning if we're even on the same page because, apparently, when it comes to actually planning this move, we could not be more different. To give some background, I'm a planner. And when I say planner, I mean I'm the kind of person who has a checklist for everything. I already have our moving timeline mapped out with deadlines for booking movers, setting up utilities, packing each room, basically everything. For me, having a clear, organized plan means we're less likely to hit any last-minute chaos, and I'll know we're prepared. But Lily? Lily is the opposite. Her entire approach to moving is basically, we'll figure it out when we get there. It all came to a head when I showed her my moving plan the other night. I'd printed out a rough timeline, divided up by week, with a list of tasks to tackle as we go along. I was kind of proud of it, honestly, but when I handed it to her, she just looked at it, laughed, and said, "Whoa, are we moving or launching a space mission?" I forced a laugh, trying to keep things light. "It's just a plan to make sure we don't miss anything," I explained. "This way, we can tackle things bit by bit and avoid stressing out at the last minute." She shook her head, still smiling. "I just don't think we need all this." Moving's not that complicated. Why don't we just pack a few boxes here and there as we get closer, and then figure out the rest on moving day? That idea alone was enough to give me anxiety. Lily, if we don't get this stuff sorted now, we could end up with a total mess on moving day. What if we can't find a moving company? Or what if we forget to set up electricity at the new place? She shrugged, completely unbothered. Then we figure it out. It's not like we're moving to another country. People move all the time without spreadsheets. And that's when I realized we were about to clash. Big time. Every time I brought up something practical over the next few days, she'd brush it off like I was suggesting we climb Everest. I'd mentioned that we should book movers early to secure a good rate. And she'd just say, "Why rush? We can book someone closer to the date." I'd suggest we start packing non-essentials now, and she'd laugh and say, "What's the point? It'll all get packed eventually." At one point, I even offered to split the responsibilities. I told her I'd handle the logistics, finding movers, coordinating with the landlord, setting up utilities, if she wanted to focus on the more creative parts like choosing where things go or picking out a few new decorations. I thought this was a great idea, but she just rolled her eyes. "I don't want to be boxed into just decorating," she said, frowning. "I want us to do this together, but let's keep it chill. Moving doesn't need to be some intense, week-by-week operation." I could feel my frustration rising. I'm not trying to make it intense. I just want things to go smoothly so we don't get to moving day and end up with a ton of stuff we forgot to handle. But she still wasn't convinced. "You're overthinking it. It's just a move. We don't need to obsess over every single detail. Worst case scenario, we deal with it then. It's not the end of the world." That's the thing. She kept framing my planning as obsessing or overthinking, when in my mind, it was the exact opposite. For me, being prepared now meant less stress later. But she seemed to feel like I was actively making it worse by focusing on every detail. The other night, things finally boiled over. I'd found a moving company with great reviews and a good rate, and I told her I wanted to book them right away to lock in the date. She just stared at me, visibly frustrated. "Why are we rushing to book movers?" she asked. "We've still got weeks. Let's just relax a little." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Lily, if we wait, we might end up paying way more or worse, not find anyone available. This way, we're set, and we don't have to worry about it later." She sighed, clearly done with the conversation. "You're just making this way more complicated than it needs to be. Moving's always a little messy, but we don't need to turn it into some massive project." That hit me hard. To me, this wasn't about overcomplicating things. It was about simplifying them. But she just didn't see it that way. To her, my need to plan everything felt like I was draining the fun out of something that should be spontaneous and exciting. Since then, it's been tense. She's agreed to let me handle a few of the logistics, but only if I don't talk about them constantly. Meanwhile, I'm trying to ease off on the planning talk, but every time I picture moving day without a solid plan, I feel this pit of anxiety grow in my stomach. I can tell she's trying to be patient, but every time I bring up something practical, she gives me this look like I'm doing too much. It's making me feel like my need to prepare is some quirky flaw rather than a way to make this easier. The other day, she even made a joke about it, saying, "With all this planning, I feel like you could run a whole moving business," which would have been funny, except she clearly didn't mean it as a compliment. I could tell she was still frustrated, even if she was trying to laugh it off. And here's the thing. I want to trust her approach, to just relax and enjoy this experience, but every time I try, I feel like I'm inviting chaos. I keep imagining us scrambling on moving day, realizing we forgot something major, or unpacking in a frenzy with no clear plan. It's like every scenario in my mind turns into a worst case, and that's why I feel the need to be on top of things. But now I'm second-guessing myself. Am I making this way more stressful than it needs to be? Should I just trust her and hope things will work out without a detailed plan? Or is she being way too relaxed for something this big? My sister, Lily, has been struggling since her baby was born 6 months ago. Between sleep deprivation, taking care of a newborn, and adjusting to being a new mom, she's been completely exhausted. She barely has a moment to herself, and she often talks about how she misses having time to do simple things like shower, nap, or read a book. Her husband does what he can, but he works long hours, so most of the time, it's all on her. Last weekend, I decided to give her a real break. I planned an entire self-care day for her. I booked her a massage, scheduled a hair appointment, and even made a reservation at a nice cafe for lunch. I arranged with her husband to watch the baby, and I covered all the details so she wouldn't have to lift a finger. I thought she'd be thrilled. She's always saying how much she misses having a day just for herself. I showed up at her place early that Saturday morning, armed with a schedule and a big smile. I told her I was there to take her out for the day, that I had everything planned so she could relax and not worry about a thing. But instead of looking happy, she looked stunned. "You plan a whole day out for me?" she asked, a bit of panic in her voice. I laughed, still not catching on to her reaction. "Yes, a full day to yourself. I thought it'd be perfect for you to recharge, so you can feel like you again. Everything's booked. You just have to get ready." She hesitated, looking almost overwhelmed. "I don't know, this feels a little sudden. I had some things planned for today, and honestly, I don't know if I'm ready to leave the baby for that long." I tried to reassure her. "I know it's a bit of a surprise, but that's the whole point. You're always so tired, and I just thought you'd appreciate some time to relax. And your husband's got everything under control. You deserve this, Lily." But she just sighed, looking at me apologetically. "I really appreciate it, but I don't think I can just leave like that. I still feel like I'm getting the hang of things, and I don't know if I'd even be able to relax, knowing I'm not here if she needs me." I could feel my excitement deflate. "Lily, you've been running on empty for months. I wanted to do something to help you feel like yourself again. I thought this would be a nice break." She nodded, her face softening but still looking stressed. "I know, and it's a sweet thought, but it feels like you didn't really consider where I am right now. It's not that simple to just drop everything, even for a day. Maybe I'm not ready for something like this yet." Her words stung. I'd spent so much time planning this, putting everything in place, so she wouldn't have to think about anything, and now she was telling me I'd gotten it wrong. "I just wanted to make things easier for you," I said quietly, feeling a bit foolish. She reached out and gave my arm a squeeze. "I know, and I appreciate it, but maybe next time, let's just talk first. Right now, what I need most is probably just a nap and maybe some help with laundry, not a whole day away." In the end, I left feeling like I'd completely missed the mark. I wanted to show her that I see how hard she's working, that I care, but somehow my gesture ended up making her feel more stressed. So, every year, my family has this tradition of doing a holiday cookie baking marathon in my mom's tiny kitchen. We bake dozens of cookies, sugar cookies, gingerbread, snickerdoodles, you name it. It's a messy, chaotic scene with flour everywhere, sprinkles on the floor, and people elbowing each other for counter space. But everyone loves it. We play old Christmas songs, wear ugly sweaters, and laugh as we decorate the most ridiculous-looking cookies. By the end, we're all exhausted but proud of our mismatched tins of homemade treats. This year, though, I thought it might be nice to give everyone a bit of a break. My mom's been saying how crowded her kitchen gets, and a couple of my cousins mentioned how stressful it can be to try and keep everything organized. So, I thought, why not make it easier on everyone? I looked up some local bakeries and found a place that hosts cookie decorating events where they handle all the baking. You just show up, decorate cookies with their pre-made icing, and they clean up afterward. There's hot chocolate, Christmas music, and even a photographer to take festive photos. It seemed like a perfect solution. No stress, no mess, and still festive. I went ahead and booked the event space, thinking it'd be a fun surprise. My plan was to tell everyone right before we left, so they'd have no time to worry about logistics. I was sure they'd love it once they saw how much easier it'd be without the chaos of baking. The day of the event, everyone showed up to my mom's house in their Christmas sweaters, ready for the usual marathon. When they asked about the ingredients and trays, I made my announcement. Surprise! We're actually going somewhere else this year. I booked us a spot at this amazing bakery that's all set up for decorating. No baking, no mess. We just show up, decorate, and enjoy. The room went silent. My mom looked confused and said, "But what about the baking?" "That's the whole point. We make everything from scratch." I try to reassure her. "I know, but this way you don't have to worry about the mess, and everyone can just focus on the fun part, decorating. It's going to be so much easier, and it'll still be festive." My cousin looked a little disappointed and said, "I actually love the baking part though. The smell of the cookies in the oven, everyone working together. That's what makes it feel like the holidays. I waved it off, thinking they'd come around. Come on, you'll see. We'll still be together, and we won't be cramped in the kitchen. Plus, they have all these pre-made icings, way more colors than we'd normally do at home. But the mood was off. My mom looked at me and said, "This tradition is about being home together, making things ourselves. It might be chaotic, but that's part of the fun. I don't think I want to just decorate cookies someone else baked." Still, I figured once we got there, they'd warm up. So, we all piled into cars and headed to the bakery. But when we arrived, everyone looked even more uncomfortable. The bakery had a beautifully arranged setup with fancy holiday decorations, professional-grade icing, and a long table of cookies, each perfectly baked and ready to be decorated. But instead of diving in, my family just kind of stood around looking lost. My cousin quietly whispered, "This feels more like a kid's birthday party than our usual Christmas baking day." I laughed, trying to lighten the mood, and said, "But isn't it great to just skip to the fun part?" Everyone gave it a try, but they were moving through the decorating with forced smiles. My mom barely decorated at all, and at one point, I caught her looking at the empty table like she missed the messy counters and warm ovens back home. My aunt, who's usually the queen of making overly complicated cookies, just sat there sipping her hot chocolate, saying, "This is nice, but it doesn't feel like our tradition." By the end, everyone had politely decorated a few cookies, but instead of the usual laughter and Christmas music, it was quiet. The energy just wasn't there. No one was taking the usual silly photos, and when I suggested we do a group shot, my mom just shrugged, saying, "Maybe next year, we'll just do it at home." As we were leaving, my cousin pulled me aside and said, "I know you meant well, but I think we all just miss doing it ourselves. It's messy and cramped, but that's what makes it feel like Christmas for us. It's not really about the decorating, it's about the baking, the chaos, and doing it all together in one place." That hit me. I thought I was doing everyone a favor by making things easier, but I'd completely overlooked what made the tradition meaningful in the first place. I'd swapped out the heart of it, the baking, the smells, the warm chaos at home, for something polished and convenient. Now, I'm wondering if I missed the mark by changing everything. I thought it'd be fun to give my family a break, but instead, they looked like they couldn't wait to leave. My mom's already said that next year we're definitely going back to doing it ourselves. I feel like I tried to make things better, but just ended up taking the magic out of it. So, AITA for trying to give my family a more convenient Christmas tradition.